Hello and welcome to Oomfs, your twice weekly podcast about all fandom happenings. I'm joined today by lovely co-hosts. That is me, B.
Hi, it's me, Mimi.
Hello, I'm Jess.
And it's me, Jen.
Yay, my lovely co-hosts. In today's episode, we are going extremely meta and taking a look not at a specific fandom, but at the platforms that they are hosted on. So fandom as we know it began with physical letters and fanzines, mostly made by Star Trek fans, let's be honest. And this then moved on to email lists and forums, which were very closed off platforms. You had to know the right people. And then in the early days of the internet, these began to be more coherently organised, slightly more public. They were a bit easier to find. So we've had some good fandom platforms, we've had some weird ones, we've had some really terrible ones. So instead of sitting here reminiscing about ghosts of fandom's past, we thought we would embrace the true chaos of fandom and attempt to tier rank fandom platforms. Today's Oomf tweet, taken from my very own Twitter timeline, is just a simple one that just says, "Live Journal, the dead mall of fandom."
As the person who had to do some live journal-based research this week, I can tell you that's actually quite true.
Live Journal is bringing me flashbacks of my very early fandom days. I don't know if I want these flashbacks, but thank you anyway.
I'm quite nostalgic about it.
I was going to say, finding fanfiction on Live Journal was such a mission.
Oh my god.
It was so hard.
There was no tagging system.
No.
As far as you couldn't really tag things. You had to just follow certain authors and then in this weird, the floor is lava way, jump between each author and the people who commented on their fic. You kind of had to hope they also wrote fic in that fandom that was good, and the lava being the terrible fic that you would find in between.
There was certain ways that you could do it.
I remember when I initially started using Live Journal, it was just very difficult because I remember finding a fan fiction. It was an incomplete one, and then I could never find it again.
I am going to make a confession now, which I'm slightly ashamed of, which is that I have never used a fanfiction site's bookmarking feature. Instead, on my actual internet browser, I have a system of fanfiction bookmarks which separated into fandom and pairing by folder.
I don't know if I want to do this podcast with you anymore.
I did think that would cause...
do you not use the bookmark on AO3?
I started using it last year.
Because
AO3 has such a nice bookmarking system.
It does. Because I grew up reading fan fiction in the era before you had any form of bookmarking feature, I just got used to bookmarking the specific fic in my actual browser bookmarks.
I was too scared to do that because I grew up with my siblings, so we shared the computer, and I was like, I can't have them know what I'm doing on the internet, so I just never bookmarked anything.
That's extremely fair. I also grew up sharing a family laptop, so between the ages of 12 and 17, no record whatsoever of any of the fan fiction that I read. Just all gone, purged.
Printed stuff. I was that
same.
kid.
Oh wow, you're one of those.
To be fair, if I really liked fan fiction, that's when I printed it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to tell an embarrassing story now. I used to print them so that I could read them again, and also so that I could take them to school and read them. I was a cool kid.
Coolest.
And I had them in a folder.
That's so organised.
And I hadn't seen this folder in years. And then when I went to move out to go to uni, my mum found it. And she was like, what is this? And then she thought I'd written it all. And I was no, it's just fiction that I printed off the internet when I was a teenager.
Oh bless.
Yeah.
And it wasn't good quality fanfic, folks. It
never is.
It was pretty let's be honest.
Did you say a bad word?
Oh, I did.
Oh no!
Swear.
It's Jen's first swear. Set off a little firework. Right. I mean, now that we've all confessed our deepest, darkest fan fiction secrets, I'm gonna move us on to what the fandom platform ranking categories are. These took a lot of time and thought, by which I mean I spent 10 minutes in my notes app deciding what they would be. So the categories we're going to rank, we're going to give each platform a score out of 10 for these different categories. So the first category is ease of access, which is basically, did you have to know the right people to get into this fandom community, or can you just walk right in? Can you just log into Twitter and search for K-pop and it all comes up and you can engage with the fandom? Or is it a GeoCities site where unless you're directly friends with somebody who's the mod of that forum, there's no way you're getting in? Second category, user friendliness of the platform. Is it as clapped as Tumblr is, or is it super adaptable, and does it have a tagging system that actually works?
I just want to say though, the clapped layout of Tumblr works for the aesthetic of Tumblr, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It does. Like, I know
Yes.
people who still use Tumblr. What am I saying? I also still use Tumblr, who are nostalgic for the different shades of blue that it used to be.
Yes.
Oh.
I miss the original blue, the
Yes.
2012 blue.
And the different people that would create ways to customize your Tumblr.
Kit guy.
X-Kit guy.
Okay, I love X-Kit Guy, but can we have a shout out for Missing E, please?
Oh, Missing E!
Yes. Oh my
Missing
God.
E. And
The
the final one,
nostalgia.
which is a browser extension that I still use, but I believe was originally developed for Tumblr, is the extension Shinigami Eyes.
Don't know that one.
It's
I've heard of it, yeah.
It's an extension that basically shows you whether the content that you are looking at is from a transphobic source.
Oh.
So it's
Very
basically
Tumblr.
highlighting, it's very Tumblr, but it is useful because, for example, it will show you whether a feminist website or news publisher is actually trans friendly or whether it's secretly TERF central. Very handy, and was developed, I believe, as a Tumblr thing. I might be wrong. The next category, rather appropriately when we've just been talking about Tumblr, is not safe for work content allowed? And by not safe for work content, I am talking about explicit fan fiction, general adult content, explicit fan art, and to an extent, I guess, if you're going to the very most logical extreme of that, is there porn on it? And how easy to access is that? How easily regulated is it? The next content is the toxicity or drama rating. How toxic is it as a platform? How likely is it that as soon as you log on, there'll be several hours worth of drama to catch up on? The next category is the longevity of the platform. Each platform gets an automatic 0 if it is actually dead and nobody uses it, or if it's been shut down by the people who run it. And it also loses points if it's likely to be shut down by developers anytime soon. It gains points if it's been bought up by a big corporation or it's a reasonably, big, well-established platform. And the final category is how unhinged is it? How absolutely mental is the content that you can find on here? How do the users behave? Is it absolutely bat poop?
Bat guava.
And the final score is an overall score out of 10 for the platform. And a fun question is, would you recommend it to friends and family? Which is the question that you always get asked at the end of a survey.
Let me think.
Wow.
As an example, would you recommend Quizilla to friends and family?
You will all find that actually Quizilla, compared to some of the messes that we have now, was fairly wholesome.
Having looked at our list of platforms we're going to talk about, I think Quizilla is like the least problematic. We're going to start off with my one, and those are Wattpad and Deviant Art.
So try to arrange them in roughly chronological order in terms of when they were founded and regardless of sort of when they started being used for fan interactions. And so, as Mimi said, the first one we'll be talking about is Deviant Art, which I have vivid memories of seeing Harry Draco fan art on at the tender age of 11.
So I guess I'll just go ahead and sort of explain what Deviant Art is to people who are listening who don't know what it might be. It's a website for the art community to feature their artwork. I think they do videos too now, photography, things like that. It was launched in 2000. So I think it was one of the first fan platforms to actually launch. And essentially, when Deviant Art became popular in fandom, it became very popular for a specific type of fandom to upload their art onto the website. I don't know how to say it. Well, let's just say the bronies used it a lot. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think.
A lot of, how should we say, neckbeards
Yes.
using Deviant Art.
What I think of when I think of Deviant Art now is artists who need to make money doing furry commissions.
Yeah.
That's the main.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's when I found out what furries were.
I'm not here to kink shame anyone. You know, furries are the backbone of the internet, as we all know. But nevertheless, that is the main image I get of Deviant Art.
On the general scale of things, with ease of access, I feel like it was one of those ones where you discovered if you were in the know in sort of fandoms, like if you knew about fandoms and you wanted to find specific fan art for it, you would know, oh yeah, Deviant Art, maybe a 5 out of 10 for ease of access. Like I think Googled at that point back in like the early 2000s, art community online. I think Deviant Art did come up, but it wasn't that easy to access, I think, just as a general person in a fandom. User friendliness, I actually thought, I haven't used it in a while, but back then it was pretty easy to navigate. You logged in, there was like a search page, they had a popular page as well. It wasn't difficult to navigate, I don't think. NSFW content, yeah, 10 out of 10. If you wanted NSFW content, you went to Deviant Art. That was
I mean, Deviant Art was definitely the first time I ever saw furry porn.
Yeah, same. And the thing is, right, while we were doing our research for this episode, I did take a look at their etiquette policy that's been updated since, and it's still pretty much more or less the same. It isn't terrible. Explicit stuff is still there, but they obviously draw lines. So like with mature content, it needs to be classified in the correct tag. And then they also state, obviously, they don't allow underage models for any nude works, which obviously, of course. And also, if you're taking naked pictures and stuff on Deviant Art for art purposes, then it needs to be with the permission of the model and things like that. So I feel like the etiquette policy is not that bad.
That's all right. Not terrible.
Yeah, not terrible.
Organised smart.
Yeah.
Consensual.
Exactly.
We're talking consent, we're talking organisation, we're talking no kink shaming whatsoever.
Yeah.
Having said that, I haven't used it in a while. So if anybody listening does still use Deviant Art and they disagree with me, do let us know.
Yeah, it's one thing having a good policy and it's another thing knowing whether it's actually well implemented.
Exactly.
Like what's their reporting system like as well?
Yeah, exactly. Toxicity rating, I would give 4 out of 10. It's pretty toxic. I think depending on which circles you interact with in Deviant Art, like it's very easy to have a good Deviant Art experience if you know the right kind of profiles to interact with. Longevity, 4 out of 10 again, because after like the early 2000s, I really stopped using it. I feel like it's one of those ones where people go, like you said, to commission specific explicit fan art, but I don't really see it being used as a fandom platform much anymore, like how it used to be back in its... Yeah, exactly. Like in its heyday, people did have like fandoms on Deviant Art, like fandom circles, but it's not really used for that anymore.
It's now a point where so many other platforms have banned any kind of explicit content that it's more like this is the platform you link back to from your actual fandom platform. So if you want to see my explicit content, go on my Deviant Art.
Unhinged rating though, I would give it like a 9 out of 10. It's pretty unhinged.
Oh yeah, solid 9 out of 10 for unhinged content.
That's my general listings. I think ranking, I'd give it maybe like a 5 out of 10, like solidly in the middle.
Not terrible, not great. Quite weird.
I was gonna say, Jess, had you like ever heard or used of Deviant Art before?
I've heard of it, but I never used it, no.
I was just gonna say, when you had heard of it, like what did you think it was?
Probably just like a fan art hosting website, really.
In principle, it is still a fan art hosting website.
I don't know, it almost feels a little bit like a prototype Instagram in a sense.
A bit. I mean, I'm trying to think if it was one of the first platforms to be used for art hosting in general.
It was originally created in 2000 as an online art community website. So yeah, you're right in that it was probably one of the first ones to be used solely for just artwork.
So moving on from art platforms, the next platform we'll be discussing is Wattpad, the only fanfiction platform that I literally did not even know existed and never used until K-pop Twitter started using Wattpad, and everyone everyone was like, oh yeah, remember all the One Direction fics on Wattpad? And I was like, sorry, what?
Now,
have I fully missed a whole fandom cultural movement or something?
I knew Wattpad existed, but for me and my corner of fandom, Wattpad was like a no-go. You only went to Wattpad if you had exhausted all other options for fan fiction. Then you could go to Wattpad.
I think this is
true.
It was a place for the truly desperate.
This is probably why I avoided it, because I went straight into sort of a fanfiction.net, LiveJournal, Tumblr, AO3 pathway. And so I was reading some really terrible fanfic, but I eventually found my way towards the good shiz and kind of stuck with that. And if I ran out of options, I would probably stoop to sort of fanfiction.net levels, but I wasn't even aware that Wattpad as a level below third circle of hell existed.
Well, I mean, I actually discovered Wattpad through fanfiction.net. I followed a couple of authors that posted on fanfiction.net, and then they also posted on Wattpad as well. And then also they posted their explicit stuff on fanfiction.net. So that's how I found that as well.
Oh, that really was the Wild West.
I also never was aware of adult fanfiction.net. Am I a fanfiction snob? Oh my God. I think I'm a fanfiction snob.
To be fair, adult fanfiction.net was a weird space because it was mostly like heterosexual cis stuff.
Those darn heterosexuals.
It was sort of pre-slash.
I think with adult fanfiction.net though, it also depended on which fanfictions you read, because I only explicitly read anime fanfiction at that point, and most of that anime fanfiction was like yaoi, so it was BL. Like,
yeah, we could do a whole episode on fanfiction. I'm gonna drag us back onto topic here and start with our ranking of Wattpad. Bearing in mind that I've just said I had no idea that Wattpad even existed, how easy was it to access?
It really wasn't. It was one of those ones where you sort of had to be in the know, I think. At the very least, when it launched in the earlier days. Now I feel like everybody knows about Wattpad, what with all these Wattpad fanfictions being turned into movies and TV shows. Back in its launching days, no, not very easy to access. You had to be in the know. I think for ease of access, I would have said a 3 out of 10 maybe. User friendliness, it was quite easy to use. I feel like their target audience was people who just wanted to read things quickly. It's not that difficult to navigate around. Like I said, I used it when I was like 12, 13 and I could figure it out, but there wasn't much in terms of making it customizable to your preferences. I don't know if that's the case now. I don't use it anymore. So user friendliness, I would have given it like a 5.
Does it actually have a tagging system? Because I've never used it.
In its early days, it had like a very minimal tagging.
It's interesting to note that Wattpad was recently bought by Naver, which is like
Korea's, I was going to say that, yeah.
Korea's Google. It's a huge corporation. And
so they paid quite a lot for Wattpad. And I'm actually not surprised because Wattpad traffic has increased significantly over this panorama. I feel like a lot of fanfiction and fandom hosting sites have increased in its users during this panini.
So you said not safe for work content wasn't allowed on there?
Oh, right. So NSFW content, it's a mixed bag, right? Having said that, I myself never interacted with any sort of NSFW stuff on Wattpad, so I wouldn't really know. But the stuff that I do know about Wattpad, so like if you look at like the After series, right, that was made into these terrible movies, it was a Harry Styles fan fiction. And like a lot of that stuff I would tag in there as NSFW because it was a lot of toxicity, and Wattpad allowed that, but I just don't know if that's because it was heterosexual.
That's a mixed bag. 5 out of 10.
Yeah, they did launch a standalone app, which was a branch off of Wattpad, and they called it After Dark. And that was for specifically the romance genre, which was intended for adult readers. But I don't actually know whether a lot of people used After Dark or not.
So I'm assuming it's going to have quite a high toxicity rating, given some of the content you've discussed on it.
Yeah. So I feel like the actual app itself, I don't feel like there were any sort of fandom toxicity in that, but the actual content that people were posting was pretty toxic. I'd give that like an 8.5 out of 10.
Oh, we're going into half marks here, 8.5. And the longevity question, can you still use it, is, well, yeah, because Neighbours bought it. Yeah.
I think it's had its peaks and low points, but yeah, you can still use it. Maybe like a a 7 out of 10, I'd say. They need to do some update.
I think it has maintained that where you go for not so classy fan fiction thing. It has kept that.
But it's interesting that BTS's webtoon is on there at the moment.
I feel like that's just because of Naver's acquisition.
Yeah, it is. But it's increasing traffic to the site.
Unhinged rating is pretty unhinged. I'm gonna give that like 9 out of 10. Mostly just because B, I feel like you don't know the extent of the toxicity of the fan fictions on there. It gets rough, B. And like they allow it.
The only Wattpad fan fiction that I'm aware of, and I'm not even sure if this is real, is that one meme about people writing Wattpad fan fiction about being kidnapped by One
Direction one.
Yeah, so overall, how would you score it?
2 out of 10. I'm not going to recommend it to anybody.
Cool.
Just go to AO3. Go to fanfiction.net if you have to.
Yeah.
Ignore Wattpad.
Okay.
The next platforms are LiveJournal and Quizilla, and you take your pick which one you'd like to start with, really.
I'm going to start with Quizilla because actually I think Quizilla represents an age of internet innocence that we have really lost. Basically, Quizilla was kind of Wattpad before Wattpad, but it was more innocent, I would say. It's opened in 2002, so really early days of the internet. And it was initially supposed to be, like its name suggests, for creating quizzes. The kind that now BuzzFeed has made millions off of. Like, what member of whatever 2002 boy band should you marry? That kind of thing. But then, as is usual with the internet, teenage girls got a hold of it and turned it into something that it wasn't really meant to be. Basically, they started making fan fictions with these quizzes. So the format was useless. It was literally, you'd have a line of fanfic and then you'd have to choose the answer and then it would take you to another line of fanfic and it went like that, basically.
Like a Goosebumps book.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, kind of like a build your own fanfic.
We see that now still with like interactive fan fiction.
Yeah. It was kind of those before that. And it's also one of the early origins of the phrase lemon, which if you're old and you've been on the internet a while, a lemon is a smutty fanfic. But the original creator of Quizilla did a Ask Me Anything on Reddit a few years ago. And he talked a little bit about that. He said, I started the site in August 2002, and it wasn't probably until late 2003 that I learned what lemon meant. I had a whole year of blissful ignorance. He said, Quizilla had a problem with that kind of content. So this guy, he was the only person in charge of it for a while. He created it. It was his site. He was the administrator. I dutifully removed it when it was reported or automatically flagged. But if nobody reported it or they used words I didn't know about, well, let's just say that I, at 24 years old, was regularly being outsmarted by 14-year-old girls. He would get messages like, please get rid of all these lemon stories. And he would innocently message these people like, why do you have such a problem with this particular citrus fruit? And then they would explain it to him and he would try and get rid of them. But then these 14-year-old girls would start tagging it with like foreign spellings of lemon or lemon backwards, or they'd tag it lemonade so that the filters would not pick up these tags.
Grapefruit. I remember the tier system of lemon, lime and grapefruit.
Yes.
And I have never in my life ever encountered a grapefruit, but I've heard they do exist.
Anyway, eventually they kind of cottoned on to the fact that that's what people were using it for. And so it had its own story section where people could post their actual stories. It was kind of just full of not very well written, lots of self-insert stuff. It was a bit of a mess. And actually, I was really surprised. It was bought by Viacom MTV networks eventually in like 2008, 2009. So then it was like massively purged of anything that was too dirty, I think.
Of course it was.
And it was eventually shut down in 2014. So it doesn't exist. So in terms of longevity, unless you want to go on the Wayback Machine, you can't see it.
Oh. So ranking out of 10 the various factors, we've kind of already gone with the longevity one. That's like a 0.
That is a 0.
Dead.
Ease of access It's easy to find and everybody knew about it. So I guess in that respect, it gets like an 8 or a 9. It also looked really innocent. So if a parent or something was looming in the background and they saw the site that you were on, wasn't that embarrassing because it just looked fairly innocent, which was a factor that mattered to me when I was a young teen. UI friendliness, it was absolute garbage. You could never find anything. People titled their fics in all sorts of weird ways. There was no tagging system, so you literally just had to click on things and hope that it wasn't going to be a really crap fan fiction or that it would be the pairing that you wanted, and then when it wasn't, you had to quickly go back and then scroll again. So yeah, like 2. Not safe for work content. It wasn't meant to be on there, but it was there, so maybe like a 5. Toxicity and drama, you know what, I'm going to give it like a 0. I don't remember any big drama. It was just a bunch of teenage girls, horny teenage girls, honestly, writing lemon fic.
And good for them. Good for them.
That was what Quizilla was, basically. Unhinged level. I don't think it was that unhinged, guys. It was really, honestly, just innocent teenage girl fan fiction. I don't really recall it being that unhinged at all. There wasn't any badly written mpreg. It was before that.
No, I'm sorry, Jen. Mpreg has been around since the conception of fan fiction.
It has, but I don't remember any of it on Quizilla. Like, it was literally just teenage girls writing self-insert Mary Sue fic. It was that kind of fan fiction, you know? So honestly, I'm going to give it like a 2. This is from my memory of Quizilla anyway. If you remember it better than me and you were hardcore into Quizilla, please talk to us because I think that will be really funny. Overall score, I mean, I have nice memories of it, so maybe like a 6. Okay, so my second platform is LiveJournal. If you are a certain age and you have been on the internet, you probably used LiveJournal at some point. I was quite surprised it started as early as it did, 1999. It was bought by a Russian company, and this was at the end of 2007. In 2011, they dropped 8.2 million users in 1 year.
That was, I believe, the first LiveJournal purge. There were several. When the first purge happened, it was very out of the blue. Nobody really knew what was going on. They just knew that suddenly loads of content got deleted, communities got shut down, people's LiveJournal pages were deleted and purged. It just kind of happened overnight, and everyone was like, where do we go now? What do we do? Do we keep using this platform? And quite rapidly people migrated over to other platforms.
Mostly Tumblr.
Some people went over to things like Dreamwidth.
So again, much like with Quizilla, I have looked at my ranking from a nostalgia perspective as opposed to how LiveJournal looks now, because you can still go there. It is still up, it still works. So I guess it gets a 10 for longevity. It's a bit weird now. There's the same community that I remember being there when I was still on LiveJournal, and there's a K-pop version of that.
Wow, really?
Both of those seem to be thriving, but that's about it. There wasn't a lot else. Ease of access. LiveJournal was very easy to access. Most people knew it existed. If you were into fandoms, then you knew LiveJournal and could probably use it. You had friends on it. So ease of access, yeah, probably like a 9 or a 10. UI friendliness, it was dog poop.
It was pretty terrible, yeah.
Finding communities was quite hard. One of my favorite ways to do it was to like go onto your friends' journals and see what they were following. Yeah. So I guess it was kind of social.
You had to know the right people.
Yeah, sort of, but also kind of not, because people would link their LiveJournal from their MySpace or whatever. So it was pretty easy to find. I used LiveJournal for, again, I just keep outing myself as a really antisocial, sad teenager today, for group writing, role playing. And those communities were very easy to find because they were quite well maintained, and they used to be like communities that were specifically for advertising your roleplay community. But still, UI friendliness like a 2, 3 maybe. Not safe for work content allowed. It was, but it depended really on your community again, I guess, because if the journals that you followed and stuff like that, if they followed not safe for work communities, then you were more likely to see it. If they didn't, then you didn't really see it. It was easy to shape your experience with LiveJournal, more so than maybe other platforms, which is probably why it lends itself to Tumblr so well.
Yeah, I think it was a lot easier to curate whether you saw any of that content because you had to specifically go looking for it to find it. It didn't just pop up on your LiveJournal. You had to follow the right people.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to people on Twitter now that use LiveJournal, the thing that they miss about LiveJournal is how curatable it was. Like we talk about on Twitter, curating your timeline. You could do that extremely easily on LiveJournal. I'll give not safe for work content allowed like a 6, because if you weren't seeking it, you probably didn't see it. Toxicity, drama, it was full of toxicity and drama, like a 9, 10. Unhinged level, again, if you were seeking the unhinged, then you would find it. But it wasn't necessarily blatant. Again, I'm just going to give it like a 5. And an overall score, maybe like 6, 7.
We've covered some very old platforms, and I think we're going to bring things a bit more up to date and also onto some much bigger platforms, like ones that have been established long before they became fandom platforms. So Jess is our resident Twitter famous host. Is going to talk about Twitter.
Jess is a Twitter BNF.
Yes.
Just in case people don't know what a BNF is, that's a big name fan.
I didn't actually know what that was, so thank you for explaining it.
So it's basically people like fans who become quite popular within the fandom. They're called big name fans.
Yeah, okay.
That's you.
So I will make a start with Twitter. For ease of access, I've given it a 5 out of 10, so middle. The reason why is because it's very accessible in the sense that everybody knows what it is. It's super easy to set up a new account. You can set up multiple accounts if you want. But to actually then get started once you've got an account, it's hard to know where to begin because there's literally millions of accounts that you could follow. And how do you want to curate it? What do you want your experience to be? So if you don't know much about navigating social media, then it's not that simple, I don't think, Twitter. I joined Twitter like 13 years ago. And back then there used to be Throwback Thursday, TBT, and Follow Back Friday.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, where
yeah.
you used to like suggest like, oh, you should follow these people because they're great.
Oh
and
my
that's
God.
how people like networked and built up following. Yeah. Ease of access as well. It was kind of revolutionary in the sense that you could actually access celebrities and people that you were fans of. Stephen Fry was one of the big early ones, and
oh my God, yeah.
He was following people back. People would DM
Yeah.
and at him. He would actually respond to people.
It's quite user-friendly in some ways.
Yeah, it's got a very simple premise. It's literally just short form blogging, and you can upload short clips and up to 4 images per tweet. So yeah, it's pretty user friendly. Anyone can just tweet and basically it. So NSFW, I gave this a 6 out of 10 because it does exist and it can just appear without warning. It's down to individuals to self-censor and add like trigger warnings or content warnings, and if people don't do that, it can just end up on your timeline, and sometimes the algorithms as well can just bring stuff up that you don't want to see.
I was going to say it's literally only in the last week or two that I think Twitter's started trialing a feature of censoring an image saying it has sensitive content. That's like this week, and it's 2022.
You also can't curate tags, which is the big problem with Twitter. You know, if you click on a tag, if somebody has used that tag to tag something that is completely not that thing, there is a chance that you will see it.
Yeah.
You know, within K-pop fandom, that is often a problem with people tagging their not safe for work fictions inappropriately.
Yeah.
So then people innocently look up a group tag on Twitter, and then they're bombarded with slash, like, which is maybe not what everyone wants.
Yeah, you can be proactive in your curating, but a lot of the time you're reactive because you're seeing things that you couldn't anticipate. And the reporting system's not great either. Next is toxicity, and that gets full marks, 10 out of 10. For reasons that we don't need to explain.
It should be pretty obvious why it gets a 10 out of 10.
Longevity, I gave a 9 out of 10 because, as I say, I've been on it now for 13 years and it's still going strong. I've been more active now than I ever have been. Any sign of it slowing down.
It's such a big social media platform. It's probably never going to go away because it's so big and has such a hold on the internet and social media.
And just media as a whole as well, in terms of TV, film, music. Yeah. Unhinged, I gave a 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
I think you can just spend just one random day on Stan Twitter or any Twitter and you'll just see varying degrees of unhingedness. Be it from people just thinking out loud and word vomiting on the timeline to just pointless petty drama that nobody needed to see, or just comparing BTS members to types of toothpaste, that kind of thing. See, yeah, unhinged doesn't have to be bad. It can be good. It can be entertaining. And then for would recommend, see, anybody could find a purpose for Twitter, but whether you want to recommend it and then have that person follow you is another question.
Yeah.
I was gonna say with Twitter as well is if you're coming on Twitter for a fandom experience, I wouldn't recommend it as a first point. For people who are new to fandoms, I wouldn't tell them to jump into Twitter. I would direct them to maybe Tumblr or something first, so that they can get an understanding or a feel of fandoms, figure out how to curate things for themselves, and then maybe they can segue into Twitter.
I think Twitter is easy once you get it, but if you don't get it, it's quite difficult. Like people that try and transition from Facebook to Twitter invariably fail.
As someone whose job literally used to be working as a social media manager, it's not an intuitive platform to use. It's
not at all.
You have to learn, you have to Google it, you have to find a mentor or somebody who will hold your hand through it, baby steps, because otherwise it's just overwhelming.
Yeah, as a fandom platform, it's good, but don't have it as your first one. So I think my overall score for recommending Twitter, I'm just going to go down the middle and say 5.
5, okay.
My other platform choice was Reddit, and first category of ease of access, I gave it a 5 because it's very basic. It's very easy to kind of understand because it's pretty old school. It's very kind of text heavy. So it's a basic premise in the fact that it's kind of like the old school forums and like Yahoo groups. So if you're old like me, it's very familiar to you, but for younger people, they'd probably find it a bit dry, a bit dull. So maybe not as accessible, not as interactive or pretty looking.
It's quite slow as well. If you don't really have conversations with people quickly on there, you'll make a post and 2 hours later there'll be a reply from someone, and then 4 days later you'll reply to them, and it'll just continue that way until eventually the thread just gets dropped.
Having said that, I think it depends on which Reddit threads you interact
Does very much wildly varies depending on subreddit.
User friendliness, I gave it a 5 out of 10 because it's very text heavy and not very visually pleasing or stimulating, so it just looks a bit boring, but it's fairly user friendly in the sense that there are ready-made communities for you. So if you're a fan of a particular thing, you can just search it up and you can join it and interact with it, or even not interact with it if you don't want to, just read it. And I think it has its uses. NSFW, 9 out of 10, because there are a lot of subreddits that are just basically dedicated to trigger warnings and just really graphic, horrific content. And again, it depends on whether the person uploading it or the moderators of the subreddit have tagged it and maybe blurred it out before you actively click on it to view it. So sometimes, I've scrolled through and followed certain subreddits that shouldn't necessarily have triggering content, but it will show pretty horrific things, and I've seen it without any prior warning. So
I think also it's worth saying that particularly for fandom communities, which can be of varying sizes, so you could have a massive fandom community like say the r/K-pop, which is very well moderated. They have a huge mod team, the mods are very on it, they have really strict rules about what you can and can't post. If someone posts something that is inappropriate, it will be taken down within minutes, whereas there have been cases of, I'm not going to name them, but quite recently there was one K-pop group's subreddit which basically got so bombarded with inappropriate content and triggering content that they had to shut it down and start a new one. It really depends on not necessarily how good the mods are, but sort of what the community is like as a whole. If you have a good, positive community with good mods and who are capable of dedicating a decent amount of time to moderating the subreddit.
Yeah, it does depend a lot on the mod team and the community guidelines. Reddit obviously has its own overarching guidelines, but the communities themselves will have their own community rules and guidelines too. So Reddit is very much down to its community, and if it's not a good community, then you're kind of stuck unless you want to create your own brand new one, but that is a lot of work. If something that you're a fan of has a community that's toxic, then you're not really going to have a good experience on Reddit. Whereas on Twitter, you can curate it as you want. You've got way more autonomy on Twitter. So the next was toxicity on Reddit.
Which I think we've kind of touched on.
Yeah, I gave that an 8 out of 10 because there are a lot of very odd people on Reddit, and there is barely any form of reporting people who like harass you or DM you with like horrible threats and things, which has happened to me on there.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of not very nice, bigoted people out there who like making other people's lives unpleasant online.
This is it, because Reddit isn't just for fans, it's for like
Everyone.
News, politics, anyone and everyone has a community on there.
I haven't talked much about gaming fandoms, but the Stardew Valley fandom is pretty lovely, and the creator of Stardew Valley does occasionally pop into the subreddit and say hello. If someone makes a really nice fan art, sometimes he'll see it and be like, oh, this is nice. So it's not all terrible, but when it's bad, it's really, really bad.
It is. Yeah, you've got with Reddit, you've got the AMAs, the Ask Me Anything feature, where famous people or experts will answer questions from people. And yeah, there's been some good ones, and there's been some legendary ones like the James Corden one.
He just got flamed. Like, that's the only way to put it. It's a really old internet term, but he just got flamed the whole time.
So for longevity, I've given Reddit 8 out of 10 because it started in 2005 and it seems to be going still pretty strong. Like, I don't see any sign of it slowing down. I'm going to give it 8 out of 10 for Unhinged. Overall, I would give it a 6 out of 10 just because it is pretty messy, but it's also pretty useful. I find it good for things that I can't do on Twitter. So for like more nuanced discussions about things, it's way better than Twitter for that. It's easier to just lurk on there and find out other things. Like my Stan Twitter account is basically just BTS. And I don't want to follow too many people because it just gets a bit overwhelming and you don't see everything on your timeline anyway. Whereas on Reddit, I can follow more things and more things that I'm more casually interested in and just lurk without actively participating, but still understand what's going on in the fandoms. I think they complement each other quite well.
I think this is possibly the moment we've all been waiting for. I've taken on the dubious task of talking about Tumblr, which is, I'm going to say in inverted commas, the fandom platform as a microblogging website. It truly is the most chaotic fandom platform ever. The fact that it's still running is just astonishing. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10 for ease of access because it was kind of the direct successor of LiveJournal, as we've touched on. It started up in 2007, which was around the time that LiveJournal was starting to get a bit shaky, and then the purge happened and early adopters of Tumblr were kind of like, hey guys, come over here quick, there's a tagging system, you can put pictures, and gradually people migrated over there. But in terms of user friendliness, it's a 2 out of 10. I was going to give it a lower score purely because the website still actually works. Like, it hasn't been deleted and purged and archived. But as any Tumblr user knows, Tumblr has been, for the past 10 years, perpetually teetering on being 2 weeks away from being shut down. It's been sold so many times. It's a mess of a platform. The developing team, I believe, does still exist. There are still Tumblr mods. They do still seem to do things, but what they do is very questionable.
If you think Twitter bookmarks are bad, Tumblr was a whole other level of terrible.
No. Yeah. The worst part about Tumblr was you would bookmark something like, oh yeah, I'll look at this later, or I'll find it in my bookmarks, and you'd never find it. No, you just wouldn't. Once you bookmark something, you've just lost it. That's it. You're never going to see it again.
There is a tagging system. That's about all I can say for it. It does exist. It doesn't work. The tagging system has been so heavily censored that there's essentially no point using it anymore. When I first started off using Tumblr, the tagging system did kind of make sense. Like, there were people I knew who had a tagging system. They would tag things as hashtag art, and that worked. And that doesn't really work anymore. The user friendliness is terrible. The user interface was famously constantly kept changing in ways that were awful. Shout out to the XKit guy and the Missing E guy who installed extensions that would make Tumblr even slightly usable. So I've given it a 2 out of 10 for user friendliness. I've given it a 0 out of 10 for not safe for work content. I could either give it a 0 or a 10, I think. Yeah. So prior to the widespread censorship of Tumblr, it was also famous as being that website where you would just randomly see incredibly explicit content. So on the one hand, you had people posting sexually explicit images and fan fiction and fan art and stuff on their blogs from the fan side, and on the other hand, you also had the fact that for quite some time, Tumblr was one of the few platforms that sex workers could use safely without being censored. And essentially, Tumblr did not like that. They started putting in a lot of changes in censorship, which resulted in not safe for work content being gradually removed. So it was kind of very varied. And then in 2018, which was what's known as the big Tumblr purge, what happened was basically the app was removed from the Apple Store because there were very unpleasant explicit images found on Tumblr, and Tumblr had done nothing to remove them, essentially. And eventually this led to a complete ban on all adult content on Tumblr, which also led to almost all fan creators being like, well, I'm off. This was the only reason I was on here. And it also meant that the platform became unsafe for sex workers.
It almost sounds like people were like, oh, I can't post porn anymore, I don't like it. But it was more that the far-reaching effects were things like pro-LGBTQ content, stuff like that was getting flagged. And for a certain group of people on the internet, I would say Tumblr was some of the first kind of interaction with that kind of material in a safe, sane, people our own age way that we had. Before that, I think it's hard to imagine now. I've only been using the internet for like the past 10 years or whatever, like recent. There wasn't really anywhere to post that stuff and to talk about that stuff and to get to know LGBTQIA plus terms. Tumblr was it.
Yeah.
So that suddenly being blocked, it was devastating for a lot of people. Like, we shouldn't understate that at all.
Yeah, I want to highlight that the Tumblr censorship was not merely oh, you can't put porn on here anymore. It was much more insipid and unpleasant than that. Like, Tumblr still, to this day, hosts content from actual Nazis and actual white supremacists, and really, really hateful people still have their content on Tumblr and are still allowed to post it.
What really got to a lot of users when they did the whole NSFW purge on Tumblr, I think prior to that, people had been asking for them to take off or censor these Nazi white supremacist blogs, right? And Tumblr's excuse for that was that they couldn't delete an entire tag. They couldn't do it. And then obviously the NSFW purge happened. And then it became very clear that actually the Tumblr staff can delete entire tags. They're just not going to delete the Nazis or the white supremacists.
Once again, the dichotomy of internet censorship. Tumblr did a really, really poor job of it, and it basically meant most people that used Tumblr just left because they didn't want anything to do with it.
I left then.
Yeah, I pretty much left then.
Pretty much.
It gets a 10 out of 10 for toxicity because, as we said, it's still one of the few platforms on the internet where you can, and content warning for discussion of suicide, it is the only website where you can still actively suicide bait somebody and they just simply do not care. That's the level of toxicity we're talking about. In terms of longevity, it's like a 3 out of 10. It's been going for 10 plus years. At any moment, it is going to get shut down. At some point, whichever company it is that owns it is going to realize it's not making any profit and they don't want to keep the servers running and it's just going to disappear.
I'll be honest, I'm surprised it's gone on this long. Like, there's no such thing as like a Tumblr influencer.
It's essentially like WordPress but worse.
It was, I think, the innovator in
its heyday.
In terms of young people feeling more open about discussing things like gender and stuff like that, because before that it was more difficult. It was more niche.
A lot harder, that's true. Everyone that I have followed for the past 10 years on Tumblr is trans now, including myself. So there we go. I've given it an 11 out of 10 for unhinged rating. Because even in its heyday, it was pretty unhinged in many ways. And it has continued that way. And I would say score overall, 1 out of 10, would not recommend. I hate it. I pray for its demise every day.
Okay, but what would you have given it, like, in terms of nostalgia rate?
Like a 2014 nostalgia rating, I would give it a 5 or a 6 out of 10. It's declined a lot. So nostalgia effect, like a 6 out of 10. Like, it was in its heyday of Super Hulock. It was great.
Oh my god. Oh my god, that literally flashbacks, PTSD.
Triggered. Our final fandom platform is Discord, which is pretty new. I'm actually not sure when it started. I think it's initially a gaming chat platform that was used exclusively by gamers, and it has since particularly with the Panny D, has shifted into more of all-purpose communication chat client that lots of people use, and because of that it's become really popular with fandoms. I'm in quite a lot of fandom discords now, which I never even used Discord before 2020, so it's like a very new platform. I would say it's probably like a 4 out of 10 for ease of access. Once you install it, it's quite easy to use because it is just a chat client. But otherwise, if you want to find specific fandom spaces, it is about who you know. You kind of have to get somebody to send you that initial invite to the Discord saying, hey, you should come and join our incredibly small niche Discord about Word of Honor. And then through that, you then maybe find other Discords that suit you. But it is a little bit cliquey sometimes. I've adopted Discord quite a lot.
It's quite good for things like extending direct message groups on Twitter. Because obviously Twitter is quite limited with what you can do. You can't send like voice messages or which you can do on Discord. The only thing I would say with Discord is that it has quite the learning curve.
It does. Yeah, even though it is just a chat client, in terms of user friendliness, I've given it a 6 out of 10 because it's user friendly once you know how to use it, but you have to learn how to use it first, because if it's a good community and well organized, which it often is, they'll have like a little intro channel. So when you join the server, they will specifically direct you to a channel and say, here's an intro channel, we've pinned a load of messages to it so that you can read through how this server works, how Discord works in general, that kind of thing. But your mileage may vary depending on if you join a Discord community or if you start a Discord community, you're kind of starting from scratch and it's not a super easy interface to use. There's whole paid thing, you can get Discord Nitro. So in a way, like, it's great because it's quite customizable, but also you kind of hit your head on the paywall ceiling quite soon into the customization. I
feel like Discord is pretty intuitive. We talk about how some places they're not very intuitive. I feel like with Discord, if you play around with it a bit, you do figure it out as it goes along, and I think that does work in its favor.
I like that because it's originally a gaming focused software. Whenever they make updates, they will tell you. They'll say, we've updated Discord and here's the new features, have a read about how to use them. And that's really handy because somewhere like Twitter, they do whatever they want. You just log into Twitter one day and you're like, they've changed the font. What? There's a button down here where you can downvote things. This is weird. And they don't ever really tell you. Not safe for work content, it kind of varies by community. I am going to give it a 7 out of 10 because Discord has an age limit, which is quite heavily enforced. It's literally a violation of their terms of service, and they will shut down your server if they find that anyone under the age of 14 has joined your server. So there is very strict modding, not just by the mods of specific servers, but also by Discord itself to try and keep it a safe space for minors. There is quite a thorough spoiler tagging for text and for images, such that if you're in a community that might be posting NSFW content, you can quite easily spoiler tag them so people don't have to see them. But like I said, it really varies on the mods of your community. If you've got good mods who will gladly kick people from the server if they post weird stuff, it's great. If you don't have very good mods, there's a chance that you could see unpleasant things. As far as I know, Discord does have quite strict rules. I think NSFW content is allowed. There is a way to flag either an entire server or specific channels on that server as NSFW, and then you have to ask mod permission to even join those channels, which is good. But again, it's like you kind of have to tailor your experience, and the mods themselves have to do a lot of tailoring and quite a lot of work to keep it a safe space. So your mileage may vary, but it's better than somewhere like Reddit. In terms of toxicity, again, that's down to the mods. I think it's quite low. I give it a 4 out of 10. Like, I've seen some Discord servers that have had internal drama. Again, depends on community. It's not as bad as other forms of social media because you are working in a closed group. But when you're interacting with something like that, you have to be aware that if you're in a closed group, you kind of need to do your own measuring of how toxic that space is and exit the space if you feel uncomfortable. In terms of how unhinged it is, it depends on what server you're in. I give it a 5 out of 10 because it has potential to be unhinged. I'll give an example. I'm in 3 or 4 different servers for Shiny. They are colloquially known as different types of servers. So there's like the big server, the small server, and there's also one server that we call the Horde horny server, which just, it's a very different vibe to all the other servers. Like most of the other servers, they're like, oh, we have one NSFW channel in which we occasionally look appreciatively at these very attractive men and go, oh yes, we are adults and we are attracted to these men, yes. Whereas this other server is just full on Wattpad, Mary Sue fantasy level Delulu in every single channel. And some people, that's their vibe. You can really, really tailor your experience of it, but pretty much the only way to tailor it is to know the right people, to find the right servers, or to start your own. So I would say overall, I give it a 7 out of 10. Would maybe recommend to a friend. Like if I was to any friend who has not tried Discord, I would say give it a go. You know, it's slightly less toxic than some other platforms. It's all right. Thus concludes our massive rundown of fan platforms. Any thoughts?
We certainly have a lot of fan platforms. I never realized how many there actually were. We didn't even discuss all of them. And like, we didn't even go into detail about all of them either.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much stuff I didn't discuss about Deviant Art and Wattpad. And
Tumblr needs its own episode.
Exactly. And then like, we didn't even discuss other platforms that we all were part of, which were like forums and stuff. It just really made me think like, wow, we really do skip from platform to platform.
Fans are so persistent. The number of platforms that we all used back in the day and the number of platforms we even use now is astonishing. Off the top of my head, I'm using like Twitter, Tumblr, Discord, AO3, to an extent YouTube and Instagram. Pretty much all fans could say the same. They've all been using that many fandom platforms, migrating between each one for the past 20 years.
Yeah, and you're not duplicating across those platforms. They all serve their own purpose, or they do for me anyway.
Oh yeah, definitely. We would also love to hear from our listeners about which fandom platforms you like to use, or indeed which fandom platforms you hate to use. Have we forgotten any? Are there any platforms that you would really like to talk about? Please at us on Twitter. For example, if you would really like to wax lyrical about how wonderful Dreamwidth was, please feel free to take our ranking categories and give them a score and let us know. Just a quick note from our sponsor today, which is the Dashcon Ball Pit.
Ball pit that somebody peed in.
Allegedly. Somebody allegedly peed in the ball pit. We will be updating our Twitter with images of said ball pit in its honour.
Do we have to?
The world needs to know, Mimi, and our sponsors are paying us absolutely no money for this.
Yeah.
Fan platforms, we love to hate them.
A necessary evil.
Do we want to maybe rank the ones we've done so far, but by unhinged rating? From least to most unhinged?
I think least would probably be Quizilla.
Yeah. So Quizilla is 2 out of 10 unhinged.
Yep.
And then I think probably Discord. It's quite chill.
Yeah,
what do we give LiveJournal for unhinged?
Again, I feel like it's pretty low because you curated your space.
And I think the next most unhinged is probably Reddit.
Yeah. And that's so strange that we're saying Reddit.
I can't believe we're saying Reddit. I can't believe we're saying that Reddit is less unhinged.
What about Deviant Art? Surely that's less unhinged than
Deviant Art has been given a 9 out of 10 by Mimi.
Deviant Art's pretty unhinged just on the basis of the stuff you get on Deviant Art.
Honestly,
Jess, you don't understand. Like, think about the most ridiculous thing you can think of, sexualize it by 100, and then add in a couple of creepy fedora wearing weirdos.
Yeah.
And that's Deviant Art.
I mean, I guess that all exists on Reddit as well, but you have to look for it, whereas on Deviant Art, I guess it was just...
So 9 out of 10, we have Deviant Art, Wattpad and Twitter, which are all similar levels of unhinged. However, the reigning champion of unhinged content has got to be Tumblr, because it gave us the ball pit, our wonderful sponsor.
Tumblr took the idea of No Nuance November to the extreme and stretched it out for the entire year. Everything had importance, so everything was a problem, and that can't work in the real world. Your
faves are problematic. So Tumblr remains the reigning champion of absolutely unhinged, 11 out of 10. When will it die?
We need whoever accidentally leaned on the delete button at MySpace.
So this brings us to the end of our episode. Mimi, if I hand over to you for whatever takeaways we can glean from this really strange episode.
I think the thing we can mostly take away from this is that there are very many fan platforms out there, a lot of which don't start off as fan platforms, but then become fan platforms. I think that's a good takeaway from the episode. Fan platforms are just unhinged in general.
Yeah.
I'll hand it over to Jess.
Yeah, so we've just spent a good amount of time talking about how toxic and unhinged fan platforms are, but nonetheless, please do follow us on Twitter at Oomfs, and
which
also
we
please...
rated a 9 out of 10 unhinged, but yes.
And a 10 out of 10 for toxicity.
Yeah, but still we want to hear from you despite all that. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube and SoundCloud channels. That's where we upload our podcasts, so if you subscribe to us and like our upload, it helps us out a lot. And please also leave comments. We really like hearing from you all. And Jen is going to give us a bit of a taste of what the next episode will be.
It will hopefully be slightly less unhinged than this episode has been. It will be on noughties nostalgia. I'm aging myself using noughties as a term, but it's a current thing in media. Lots of nostalgia for the noughties, and being as we all lived the noughties, most of us were teenagers, early 20s throughout the noughties, we thought it would be an interesting topic to touch on. So that will be your next episode.
Yeah, if you've managed to listen to this whole episode of us just really deep diving into some platforms that probably should have been left well enough alone, then thank you for listening. And this has been Oomf Said.